So the guy that is training to run the race and run so that he might obtain the prize, does he live his life followed and carried around by his passions to the excess, or does he temperate his life in such a fashion that he can reach the goal that he has? You see that? That is the mentality that Paul is referring to when he's discussing the elder men within the assembly being temperate. Come with me to Galatians chapter 5. You'll notice, folks, that temperance is one of the fruit of the Spirit. In verse 22, he says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and what's the next one? Temperance. So this is one of the fruit that the Spirit produces within the believer's life is this issue of temperance. This ability to be able to control the passions and desires and to focus on the goal and stick with it. Okay? Come with me back now to Titus chapter 2. Now he goes on here. He says that the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, and then he's going to, they're also now, at the end of the verse, supposed to be sound in three things. Okay? Number one, sound in faith. Number two, sound in charity. And number three, sound in patience. Now we've already studied what the word sound means, right? The word sound means to be well, to be whole. Okay? We studied that when we looked at the issue of sound doctrine, and back up in chapter 1, verse 13, when we studied the issue at the end of the verse, that they may be sound in the faith. Okay? So one of the characteristics of the aged men within the assembly, according to verse 2, is that they are to be sound. Come on. You help me out, Joel? One more time. They're to be sound in the faith. Now, as we've studied, we're not going to get into the details of this because we've studied this over and over and over again as we've already went through chapter 1, okay? But to be sound in the faith is dealing with that which is believed, i.e., the body of truth for the current dispensation of grace that is communicated to us through the epistles of the Apostle Paul. Sound in the faith. Number two, they're to be sound in charity. Charity, the word there, charity, is dealing with it's not talking about romantic love, it's talking about brotherly love. The love that a brother should have one for the other. So not only are they to be sound in the faith and to maintain their stance in the truth and so forth, but the aged men are also to be sound in charity according to the Apostle Paul. Now we were just there. What was the first fruit of the Spirit there in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22? But the fruit of the Spirit is love. Okay? Come with me to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Look at verse 1. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you, that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called. Look at verse 2. With all lowliness and meekness, with long-suffering, forbearing one another in what? See, the aged men are to be sound examples of how to forbear with one another and long-suffer with one another in what? Now, is there an aspect to that comes from experience? Yes, there is. The experience that you would hope, wish, and think that an aged saint would have. So they are to be sound in faith. They are to be sound in charity. Look at chapter 5 of Ephesians, verse 2. And walk in love. Well, verse 1. But be therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk how? In love, as Christ also hath loved us, and hath given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. So the aged men within the assembly, while the physical aspect, while their involvement in the local church in a physical sense may be waning as they age, they are no longer able to do some of the things that they used to be able to do within the local church. Okay? They are no longer able to participate with those activities. They are to move into a new phase, in my mind, where they are to be examples of what it means to walk in love. To be sound in faith and sound in what? In charity. Okay? And then, come with me back to Titus. The third thing is patience. Titus chapter 2, verse 2. That the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith and charity, and in patience. In this case, patience deals with steadfastness, consistency, endurance. In the New Testament, the characteristic of a man who is not swerved from his deliberate purpose and his loyalty to faith and piety by even the greatest trials and sufferings. When it talks about patience, it's talking about somebody who can be an example of what it's like to go through the battles of life and come out the other side still maintaining a hold on the truth and a belief in God and a belief in God's Word that His grace is sufficient, that His grace is enough. That is the idea of being sound in what? In patience. Listen, you study this stuff and you get the real understanding that is this a high calling? This is a high calling, folks. And if you are in this assembly and you would fit into this age demographic, this is this is Christ's instructions to you as a member of the church, the body of Christ, in your current station in life for how you can act, function, behave, and live in a manner that, in accordance with verse 1, that is becoming sound what? Doctrine. Patience. You know Romans chapter 5, right? And we know that patience worketh experience. And experience what? Hope. And hope maketh not ashamed. See that issue there of experience again. Come with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 6. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, look at verse 4. Notice, but in all things approving ourselves as the ministers of God, in much what? Patience, in afflictions, in necessities, in distresses, in stripes, in imprisonments, in tumults, in laborers. The aged men of the church are supposed to be, according to the Apostle Paul, a group of collective wise elders who have fought the battles of the faith, who have maintained their doctrinal integrity, who have done what needed to be done, and can now move into a different role in the assembly, where they can stand as examples of what it means to be sound in the faith, to be sound in charity, to be sound in patience. Look at Colossians chapter 1. You know, some of you don't know Brother Fife. Okay? In 2002, the church in Muskegon, Michigan there, the pastor that was there at the time was asked to leave. Brother Fife, Sister Fife's husband, was, I don't know for sure how old he was, but he had to be in his high 80s. He was in a little hover-around chair. He drove to the front of the church. He got up, he opened up his Bible, and he started to teach. And I was sitting there, 23 years old, saying to myself, this is not right. This man should not have to do this at his age. He had already gone through that. You follow what I'm saying? And there needs to be, that is the mentality, the faithfulness, the perseverance. The church had split, and he drove his cart up there for those 3-4 Sundays in a row to teach, because that's what he knew needed to be done. You follow what I'm saying? That's an example of what we're talking about. Colossians chapter 1, verse 11. Strengthened with all might, according to His glorious power, unto all what? Patience and long-suffering with what? Joyfulness. So the elder men are to be examples. If you just go back with me, come back with me to Titus. Verse 2, chapter 2, verse 2. How is it then that an older man can have a life that becomes sound doctrine? They focus their attention on verse 2. Sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, sound in charity, and also sound in what? Patience. In the midst of waning health, the aged men are to particularly endure, thereby manifesting the sufficiency of the grace of God in every circumstance, and demonstrate patience, is what Paul is discussing here. Now we're at verse 3, our last verse for this morning. Paul's now going to turn his attention to some instructions now to the aged women. And he says here, the aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. So, this is the only time, folks, that the expression aged women is used in the New Testament. Okay? But I think it's pretty obvious what it means when you think about what the aged men expression meant. Okay? If aged men meant old men, then aged women probably means what? Old women. Okay? Now again, I'm not saying when you enter that category. Okay? Just being clear about that. Now, that being said, the expression, notice what it says. The aged women what? Likewise. So everything, ladies, that we just said about the guys, he says what? Likewise. So are the aged women then supposed to be sober, grave, so on and so forth? Okay? So everything we just said about the men, he says here in verse 3, the aged women likewise. So they are also supposed to be known by the same behaviors, attitudes, and so forth that we just went over in verse 2. And then he's going to elaborate a little bit further, particularly now for the women. He says here, the aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh what? Paul's concern here, folks, is that the older women behave in a manner that is becoming and consistent with what? Holiness. Now what did he say in verse 1? But speak thou the things which what? Become sound doctrine. He uses the same word again here in verse 3, speaking specifically to the aged women, and he says, the aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh what? So in other words, is there a scriptural way for an aged woman in the church then to behave in a fashion that is in line with holiness and in line with sound doctrine? The answer is what? Yes. Okay? So you see that. And I just want to say this before we look at this specifically to the women. Women possess a great ability to either aid or harm the ministry. They possess a great ability to either aid or to harm the ministry. Men too, okay? And just listen to what I have to say. Women set the unspoken tone of an assembly. You ladies know what I'm talking about. If you have ever walked into a church where there was coldness and distance and lack of acceptance, a lot of that stems from the attitude that the women have.
Left behind.